The world has changed. But before we get a little too far ahead on what the world could look like, let's at least go to the Montreal Canadiens first and talk about their new GM, the 18th in franchise history, Kent Hughes, introduced to the media Wednesday afternoon. I actually got to go. So I got to sit in the Bell Center in this section, and we're just like staring at like three guys sitting on the ice with the Jumbotron lowered pretty much at ice level behind them. A really interesting scene.
Could you see the expressions on their faces, or were you too far? Because it's so far.
I was a little far to see the expressions on their faces, but I imagine that Kent Hughes probably feels a little bit of relief after all the media whirlwind and figured out if he won the job or not. He apparently had no hesitation about taking it. But in all honesty, I was a little far in terms of seeing their actual facial features on how they were answering questions. But I got to ask a question at the very least. Let's get into it. What were your thoughts on Kent Hughes being hired as GM? I know we talked about the fact that maybe the Canadiens wanted a francophone GM. They definitely wanted a bilingual guy, and we had the back and forth discussion on that. But they end up taking an Anglophone who is bilingual and spoke French pretty well, and has the name Kent Hughes.
Look, it was a great introduction, I thought. I mean, and I'm not making light of Kent Hughes or even the situation. These things always start well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like going to a wedding. Like everyone feels happy in that moment, and you're starting this thing, and there's a lot of optimism. I think that's how it felt to me. I mean, this is fresh blood for the organization. Marc Bergevin was there almost 10 years. And I know it's been a few months since he left the organization, but now you're starting to see how it might go forward. Kent Hughes wisely, and I believe he believes this, but, drops that little nugget that he wants to build a offensive team, which is something I think we'd both agree the Canadiens really haven't been. Even while they've had success, they've kind of done it in a grinding style, last year's playoffs being a prime example of that. Mm-hmm. They've not been a team that really goes head to head with, say, like the Maple Leafs of the world. They had Philip Deneau to shut down the Leafs top players, but they weren't outscoring the Leafs so much in those games, if you know what I'm saying, in terms of their style of play. And so, mm-hmm. That's a great way to start. I mean, if you're a fan, I guess, first of all, you want your team to win, but secondly, let's face it, people would probably rather watch a 5-4 game than a 2-1 game. I know that there's some people out there that say they love the 2-1 game. I don't really believe. I don't believe that. I'm not saying every 2-1 game sucks either, but I've seen a few 5-4 games in the last couple of weeks, and they've been a hell of a lot more exciting with lead changes and wow, and guys putting up lots of goals. And so anyway, I think that Kent Hughes touched the right notes. He was, not that specific in terms of what he wants to do with the team. I think that's a reasonable approach. I mean, before you've even met your staff, before you've met the players in person, it's hard to come in and say, this is the course I'm going to take. Like a lot of people remember the Brendan Shanahan that was called the Shana Plan, that there was the day after a season that went wrong, Brendan Shanahan came out and very much outlined exactly what he wanted to do. That was a year after he took the job. He spent the first year on the job just observing what was going on in the organization. And then on that day, I think they fired 17 people or so, and, basically the whole coaching staff, the other management staff, a bunch of scouts, and started rebuilding. I tend to think that this is going to end up in a rebuild of some shape or form in Montreal, but there's not a lot of incentive to come out and say that on the day one. So I thought he handled it well by all accounts. I don't speak French myself, but it sounds like the French media was, I saw a few tweets about how, he handled himself well and with the French questions, which, that's going to be a story. That isn't going away. I don't think it'll be talked about next week again, but how he's embraced in the marketplace or how he interacts with the media, I think is going to be part of the story. It's the most unique position in hockey, in my opinion, the GM of the Canadiens. And, I wrote a column that appeared in the Star this week, and it's trying to make that point. It's he can, he's going to, the hockey decisions at least will be split between Jeff Gordon. There's a tandem here. So they're shouldering some of the second guessing, but it's going to be up to one guy to manage that media. And I don't know how he'll be embraced, honestly, as an Anglophone, even if he's from the West Island, even if his French is more than capable. It sounds to someone who maybe doesn't understand the culture of Quebec or doesn't understand how important the Canadiens are to the culture and what goes on. It's a very unique thing being the Canadiens GM. And so I'm fascinated to see how he approaches it. there's all these big contracts, right? Like that's
Yep.
the other part of this. Like it's so easy to get discussing the other things, but this is a big job in front of him. You know, what he does with Carey Price, how he handles Brendan Gallagher, Jeff Petrie, you know, guys that have been really loyal players to that organization that, you know, recently have signed contract extensions with the idea they'd be there and the team would be contending to win. Well, what happens if next year the Canadiens are trying to lose or trying not to win, or, you know, however you want to put that, trying to go in another direction? You know, do those guys want to be part of it? So I think it's going to be intriguing. I like the first day. I have no points of criticism, honestly. There's nothing there that, you know, I thought Kent was firm and, you know, laid out his vision in general enough terms, but we don't have a lot of specifics just yet in terms of what he intends to do.
Yeah. Two things. For people who aren't really familiar with the timeline of how Kent Hughes ended up in the position that he's in right now, I believe it was like Sunday. They ended up making the decision that Kent Hughes was going to be the guy. The Canadiens, essentially Jeff Molson and Jeff Gorton. And then Monday, I believe that's when they negotiated his contract. And then Tuesday, they announced that he's general manager. And then Wednesday, he's unveiled to the media. And whether it's as we're speaking or whether as you're listening to this podcast, Kent Hughes is probably in Vegas right now, meeting the Montreal Canadiens for the very first time as GM. I can understand why you would go to the media and not have a plan laid out about who's going to go or what players you want to prioritize. I think, if memory serves, the only time he ever mentioned any players specifically, like he mentioned like Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield as like two young players, obviously as part of like the team's young players, but like he didn't mention anyone specifically by name. Also, I'll add this as well. Jeff Gorton said no player on the Montreal Canadiens to this point has asked him to be traded. I think that's a very important point to point out, but we'll see how that goes.
Why did anyone think a player would have asked to be traded?
I think with the way that the season is going, and everyone kind of knows that the team is it's weird to say in the tank, but where they're at right now, a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, someone might want out. Like Mike Hoffman, for example, a guy who signed a 3-year deal in the offseason. Maybe he feels it's time for him to leave. People are wondering, who knows, but maybe he doesn't want to leave. Tyler Toffoli, I believe after the game against the Dallas Stars, like straight up said like, hey, I want to be part of the solution going forward. I want to be a part of this team. Like I'm not quoting him verbatim, but he essentially said something along those lines that, you know, he would like to be part of the solution here in Montreal. So it'll be really curious to see who wants to stay as part of this team. The second thing I just want to add.
The other thing too, I don't think, the more I think about this team, like it's probably not going to be a full scale teardown, just because first of all, they have some talented players, of course,
they do,
and guys that are signed. And I think just even from a practical matter, it's not like you could trade all these, like it would be very difficult in this environment to trade and unload all these players. So it's important when someone like Toffoli steps up and says he wants to be part of it, because that will be part, I think, of the job too, is just weeding through like who really has a stomach for this, or who's going to be pulling the rope in the right direction, or who's going to look around and be like, F this, like this isn't what I signed up for. You know, and so that'll be part of the job. And then obviously handling Carey Price. I think that's going to be, it's not relevant today because he's just restarting his knee injury, but you know, whether he wants to still be part of the organization, whether they can trade, I think that for me, it's almost the first decision. I mean, obviously in practical terms, the first decision will be like trading Ben Sherrod and doing what you can do at this trade deadline. But then I do think how you handle the Carey Price situation will be fascinating.
The second thing I just want to mention with Kent Hughes, with regards to language, just in my limited viewing of French media members, at least on Twitter anyway, I've seen a lot of support for Kent Hughes as a hiring off the language thing. And the people who I've seen be really critical are just kind of randoms on Twitter. I think we have to be very careful with this story. I think you're right in the fact that it could still very much be a story, but I think it'll be a vocal minority of people who are essentially pushing the goalposts with this, because at the beginning of this whole process, people were trying to explain why it was important for a bilingual person to be GM of the Montreal Canadiens. But now that a bilingual person is in charge and they have the name Kent Hughes, you're going to see other people be like, oh, c'est pas un Québécois, c'est pas un gars francophone, un gars avec un nom français. Like, we're seeing people kind of push back, and that just kind of shows that there are people who just wanted a particular thing from jump. But we have to be careful about whose voices we hype up with that, because I'm not seeing people from RDS do that. I'm not seeing anyone from Journal de Montréal do that necessarily, but that could change. Who knows? I don't know. But a lot of them are just like random Twitter eggs And
Yeah,
I
we
think
can't
a
give
lot
the
of
egg
people,
accounts too much attention. That's what you're saying.
that's it. Like, that's what I'm saying. A lot of people I've seen have been supportive of the fact that, hey, they fulfilled this criteria. And Kent Hughes, even with a name like Kent Hughes, just like me, Julian McKenzie, we're just as much Québécois as a Mathieu Darche or Daniel Brière or any other Francophone name you want to put in there. So let's be careful with how we hype up some of these people who make that a big deal, whether it's in the coming weeks or throughout his tenure or whenever, because from what I've seen, a lot of people seem to be down with the fact that Kent Hughes, a guy from the West Island of Montreal, is the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens.